There is a street in Detroit you cannot walk down. You cannot walk down it because it is no longer a street. It is 8 lanes of sunken concrete, a trench cut below the level of the city where cars move fast and nobody slows down and nobody stops because there is nothing here to stop for. The exit signs say I-375. The locals call it the Chrysler Freeway. Most of the people who drive it every morning have no idea that they are driving down the middle of what used to be the busiest black street in America. They are driving down Hastings Street. They just can't see it anymore because Hastings Street was paved over on purpose, and the neighborhood it ran through was erased so completely that the city had to put up a sign decades later just to prove it had ever been there at all. Remember that name, Hastings Street. We're going to come back to it, and when we do, it's going to tell you everything about how a city deletes a place it doesn't want to remember. This is the story of Black Bottom. It is the story of a community that was hemmed into a few square blocks by law, that was told where it could live and where it could not, that built doctors' offices and hotels and churches, and one of the greatest music scenes the country ever produced inside that cage. And that was then condemned as a slum and bulldozed into rubble so that a freeway and a set of luxury apartments could take its place. It is not a story about a neighborhood that fell. Neighborhoods fall slowly from neglect, from bad luck, from factories closing and money leaving. Black Bottom didn't fall, it was removed. There is a difference, and that difference is the whole story. Start with the name, because even the name is not what it sounds like. People assume Black Bottom was named for the people who lived there. It wasn't. The name is older than that, older than the Great Migration, older than the automobile. When French settlers farmed this low ground along the river in the 18th century, they named it for the soil. Dark, rich, river-bottom earth, black as coffee grounds. There had once been a river running through here, the River Savoyard, and the city had buried it underground as a sewer back in 1827, long before any of this began. So before there was a neighborhood, there was already something buried under the ground here. Keep that in mind too. This is a place that keeps burying things and building on top of them. In 1910, there were only about 5,700 black residents in the entire city of Detroit. 20 years later, there were 120,000. That is not a typo. In 2 decades, the black population of Detroit grew more than 20-fold, and the reason was sitting on assembly lines a few miles away. Henry Ford had announced the $5 day, double the going factory wage, and word of it traveled down through the South like a current. Families left Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia, left the cotton and the sharecropping and the daily humiliations of the Jim Crow countryside, and they got on trains heading north to the city where a man could earn real money building cars. They arrived by the hundreds every single day. And when they got to Detroit and went looking for somewhere to live, they discovered the catch. They could earn the money. They could not live wherever they wanted to spend it. Detroit, like almost every northern city in that era, was carved up by an invisible set of rules that were no less real for being unwritten. Restrictive covenants, clauses sewn into property deeds, made it illegal to sell certain houses to black buyers. Banks drew red lines on maps around black neighborhoods and refused to lend inside them. White neighborhoods made it understood, sometimes politely and sometimes with bricks through windows, that black families were not welcome. And so 120,000 people, a population the size of a small city, were funneled into a narrow strip of the Near East Side just a few blocks wide. Hastings Street ran straight up the spine of it. The railroad tracks boxed it in on one side, the covenants boxed it in on the other, and there was nowhere for it to grow but inward, denser and denser, families stacked on families. The conditions were exactly what you would expect when you force that many people into that small a space and then refuse to invest a dollar in it. The houses were old, frame houses thrown up in the 19th century for the Jewish and Eastern European immigrants who had lived here before, landlords. knowing their tenants had no legal place else to go, charged whatever they wanted. The Urban League documented one apartment, renting for $50 a month over a storefront, where to get to your own front door, you had to climb a ladder and walk across a roof. $50 a month in money that would be close to $1,000 today to live in a place you entered by crossing a rooftop. Multiple families pooled their wages to make a single rent. Overcrowding, poor plumbing, disease, all of it was real. And the city's officials would later point to all of it as the justification for what they did. But here is what those officials left out of the story. Inside that cage, those same people built something extraordinary. Because they could not shop in the white stores downtown, they opened their own. Because they could not see white doctors, they trained and hired black ones. By 1942, packed into Black Bottom and the business district just to the north, there were more than 300 black-owned businesses. Not a handful, more than 300. Drugstores and barbershops and beauty salons, restaurants like the Busy Bee Cafe and the Lil Soul Food, tailors and shoe repair shops, the Wolverine Barbershop, the Hardin Drugstore, doctors' offices, and a hospital and funeral homes. And in 1936, a newspaper was founded right here to cover a community the white papers ignored. The Michigan Chronicle, which is still publishing today. The churches anchored everything. Second Baptist in Bethel, AME, ran programs to help the new arrivals from the South find their footing, find work, find rooms, learn the rhythms of a northern industrial city. A preacher named Itata C.L. Franklin set up his new Bethel Baptist Church right on Hastings Street, and his little daughter sang in the pews there before the world ever heard the name Aretha. The community was poor in its housing and rich in almost everything else, rich in institutions, rich in self-reliance, rich in the kind of density where everyone knew everyone and a child could be raised by an entire block. And there was the Gotham Hotel. Hold on to the Gotham. When traveling black Americans, entertainers, athletes, businessmen came through a country that would not rent them a room in its nice hotels, they came to the Gotham. It was widely called the finest hotel for black Americans anywhere in the world. Marble and fine linens and a first-class dining room in a country where most hotels would not let a black guest pass the front desk. The Gotham was proof, standing on a corner of Detroit, that the only thing separating this community from the grandeur it was denied everywhere else was someone finally being allowed to build it. But if Black Bottom was the body of this place, the district just to the north was its beating heart, and its heart had a name that told you exactly what it meant to the people who lived there. They called it Paradise Valley. Paradise Valley was the entertainment district, and in the 1940s and 50s, it was one of the great music scenes in the United States. The clubs ran down St. Antoine and Adams and Hastings. Supper clubs, swing joints, smoky little rooms, and grand theaters. There was the Forest Club, the Horseshoe Lounge, Henry's Swing Club. The blues didn't just pass through here, it lived here. John Lee Hooker stood up in a Black Bottom club, started stamping his foot and talking in that low Mississippi growl, and recorded Boogie Chillin', one of the most important blues records ever made. And right there in the lyric, he names the street and the club, says he's heading down to Hastings to Henry's Swing Club tonight. That record went to #1 on the race charts. The address in the song was real. You could walk to it. And because the touring giants of American music could not get rooms in the hotels downtown, they came to Paradise Valley too. Duke Ellington played here. Count Basie played here. Billie Holiday sang here, and Sarah Vaughan and Ella Fitzgerald. The young bebop revolutionaries, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis, passed through these clubs. The crown of it was the Paradise Theater, a grand hall that had opened back in 1919 as the home of the city's symphony, and that in these years became a jazz mecca, where the biggest names in black music performed to packed houses. The heavyweight champion of the world, Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, kept an office in this neighborhood. This was not the margin of American culture. For a couple of glorious decades, on a few crowded blocks that the rest of the city tried to pretend weren't there, this was the center of it. And somewhere on these same blocks, in these same years, there was a young man growing up, a kid who had come north from Alabama with his family as a boy, who worked the auto plants and the rackets and the union halls, who soaked in every lesson this neighborhood had to teach about power and survival. Nobody filming the jazz clubs paid him any attention. We'll come back to him at the end because what he became is the cruelest and most fitting punchline this whole story has. So that was Black Bottom and Paradise Valley at their height, penned in by law, poor in housing, and somehow, in spite of all of it, one of the richest concentrations of black business, black music, and black community life in the entire country. Now here is where the story turns, and it turns on a single word: slum, the very thing that made Black Bottom what it was. The density, the old buildings, the impossibility of expanding also made it look to the men drawing up Detroit's future on big paper maps like a problem to be solved. The houses were genuinely old and genuinely overcrowded. That much was true, but the land underneath them was not a problem at all. The land was a prize. Black Bottom sat right up against downtown, minutes from the central business district, ringed by major roads, ideal for redevelopment. The city looked at the most valuable underdeveloped real estate near its own downtown core and saw that it was occupied by tens of thousands of black renters who had been given no other place to live, and it made a decision. In April of 1946, Detroit's mayor, Edward Jeffries, put it in writing. The area, he wrote, should be acquired by the city and completely cleared of all buildings, every structure taken down, and then replanned and handed over as much as possible to private developers for new housing, cleared of all buildings. They called it the Detroit Plan. In the language of the era, it was slum clearance and urban renewal, clean bureaucratic phrases for a brutal idea. The plan was not to fix the neighborhood. The plan was to erase it and start over with different people. A new mayor, Albert Cobo, took office and pushed it forward hard. Cobo had run, in part, against public housing for black families in white areas, and under him, the bulldozers got serious. Through the late 1940s and into the 50s, the city began condemning Black Bottom block by block. Notices went out, buildings came down, and in 1956, on the cleared ground, the first piece of their placement broke earth. The Lafayette Pavilion, the opening high-rise of a development that would become Lafayette Park, its superblocks and towers designed by one of the most celebrated architects in the world, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, award-winning architecture rising directly on top of the rubble of people's homes. And then, in 1959, came the Freeway. And now we come back to Hastings Street. When the engineers laid out the route for the Chrysler Freeway, the sunken expressway that would let suburban commuters reach downtown in 10 minutes, they ran it straight down the central axis of the black community. They ran it down Hastings Street, the single most important commercial street in black Detroit, the street in the blues song, the street with the churches and the shops and the swing clubs, was dug out and turned into a concrete trench for cars. The spine of the neighborhood became the spine of the freeway. There is no more literal way to erase a place than to take its main street and pour an interstate down the hole where it used to be. By 1964, I-375 ran through the heart of what had been Black Bottom, and the neighborhood was essentially gone. Not damaged, not diminished, gone. As one account put it, not a single structure was left standing from the original neighborhood where more than 300 black-owned businesses had operated. The teardown stretched across roughly 20 years, scattering residents the entire time. The Gotham Hotel, the finest hotel for black Americans in the world, was demolished, imploded. Reduced to dust like everything around it, the Paradise Theater survived only because it became something else entirely. It was eventually restored to its original 1919 identity and is once again Orchestra Hall home to the Detroit Symphony, a building that outlived the Black District that had filled it with jazz precisely by ceasing to be part of it. And the people who were cleared out received almost nothing. Predominantly black, predominantly poor, displaced from their homes, they were turned loose to find new housing on their own, with no meaningful government help in a city whose segregated housing market gave them almost nowhere to go. Most of them did not move up. They moved sideways or down, landing often within a single mile of the new highway, in homes that were no better than the ones the city had just demolished. They were told their neighborhood was a slum and that they were being saved from it. What actually happened was that the land was taken, the community was broken apart, and the wealth those 300 businesses represented simply vanished, because you cannot pour a freeway through a man's storefront and then expect him to pass that storefront down to his children. So who got Lafayette Park, the gleaming Mies van der Rohe development built on the cleared ground? Not the people who had been cleared. By the 1970 census, Lafayette Park was about 3/4 white. The neighborhood condemned as a black slum had been replaced on the very same dirt by a mostly white middle-class enclave in celebrated modern architecture. In 1974, the Detroit Free Press, looking back at the whole effort, summed it up in a single word in its headline. It called it a fiasco. And this was not Detroit alone. The same script played out in city after city across America in the same decades, the same federal urban renewal money, the same logic. Boston's West End, San Francisco's Fillmore, black and immigrant and working class neighborhoods all over the country, condemned and cleared and paved, the residents scattered, the land handed to someone else. Detroit was simply one of the most complete erasures. In Detroit alone, the official count says highway construction and urban renewal displaced around 43,000 people in those years. Historians who have studied it closely think the real number is closer to 100,000. 100,000 people moved out of the way so that other people could get downtown faster. Now, that young man we left in the jazz clubs of Paradise Valley, the kid who came up from Alabama and learned this neighborhood's hard lessons about power, his name was Coleman Young. He grew up in Black Bottom. He watched the neighborhood that raised him get marked as blight on a city planner's map, condemned, and bulldozed out of existence. And in 1974, the same year that Free Press headline ran the word fiasco, Coleman Young was elected the first black mayor of the city of Detroit. The boy from the neighborhood the city erased rose up to run the city that erased it. He inherited a Detroit that had spent 2 decades destroying the very streets that made him, a downtown ringed by freeways poured through the ghosts of black homes, a community he could remember walking through as a child that now existed only in the memories of the people who had lived it. For a long time, there was nothing to mark any of it. You could stand on the grass at Lafayette Park or on a pedestrian bridge over the rushing traffic of 1375, and there was no sign, no plaque, no acknowledgement that a whole world had been here. It was as if the city had erased not just the buildings, but the memory. It took until 2021, 60 years after the bulldozers, for the state of Michigan to finally erect a historical marker, a single placard, to prove to anyone passing by that Black Bottom and Paradise Valley had ever existed at all. And the freeway, the Chrysler Freeway at 375, the concrete trench laid down the bones of Hastings Street. The city has now decided it was a mistake. There are plans funded and underway to tear the highway out, to fill in the trench, to turn it back into a street-level boulevard, to study how to repair what one freeway did to one neighborhood across one generation. They are going to dig up the thing they buried Hastings Street under 60 years too late. And the people who lived in Black Bottom and could tell them what they destroyed are nearly all gone now. So stand there on that patch of grass and think about what is underneath you. There is a boulevard coming on top of a freeway that was built on top of a neighborhood that was built on top of old immigrant. Frame houses that were built on farmland the French named for its black soil, where a river once ran before the city buried it as a sewer in 1827. Layer under layer under layer, each one poured on top of the last, each one trying to forget the thing beneath it. But it's all still down there. The streets are still down there under the concrete. The 300 businesses are still down there. In the photographs and the memories and the one historical marker, Black Bottom is still down there. The way the river is still down there, running, quiet, under everything they built on top of it.